Alright guys, welcome back.
Howdy, howdy.
Part 2. Normally we start off with an article or a myth, but because this is part 2 of one episode, we've already done that in part 1. Go check it out. So we're going to get started. I know towards the end of the last episode, we talked about wanting to get into how do you structure an offer and get it accepted. So I think we're going to start off what we do. In the first part of the video, you remember us talking about homework. You find a home you like.
Oh, man, I thought I was out of school. No more homework.
So we're going to have to do homework. There's obviously the listing price, but should we take that for face value? Is there anything that you're going to do, Lydia, that's going to help your buyer as far as price is concerned?
Well, if it seems fairly priced, I mean, then that's one thing. If I walk in and I'm like, that seems about right for the houses I've seen in this area. But if I walk in, especially if I walk into something and I'm like, I feel like this might be a little bit, then or if you as the buyer say, hey Lydia, can you do this for me? I'm going to run a comparative market analysis on that. Now I know that normally we think of that in terms of sellers, but as a buyer, you want to make sure that you're paying a good amount. And even before we get so far as for you to, we have an offer written, you have an earnest money deposit that's sitting, but then you need an appraisal done. If we can go into it knowing, okay, this is about fair market value, this is what we've seen, then that's just one more thing where you don't want to go through more hassle than what's necessary.
Right.
And we're not appraisers, but the comparative market analysis help. We are market experts.
Exactly. And I think it really, there's a difference between having a competitive offer and it just being egregious. Now, if that's what you want,
Yeah.
If this home is absolutely, spare no expense, we'll write it up for you that way. Exactly. But I mean, even if I'm sitting on a pile of money, I want to make sure I'm getting value flat out. So, we're still going to run that for you.
For sure.
And then what I'm going to do after we do the analysis, Lydia does the analysis, I'm going to call that listing agent. It's very important because you may think, oh, well, here's how we're going to structure it and throw caution to the wind and hope that something sticks.
Just going to throw all the money at it.
Right. Well, the seller might not be looking just for price.
What?
I know.
What about show me the money?
I know, right? Show me the money. What might they be looking for other than price?
Well, a big one can be occupancy. Again,
Yeah.
I would hope that at this point in the game, the seller's already looking for their new home. But whether or not they are, maybe they need time to move out. And that's something, if you can live wherever you're at an extra 30 days and give the seller an extra 30 days for occupancy and they need that time, man, that's super appealing.
Yep. And let's say, somebody beat you out in price by $5,000, but they want to charge that seller to live in the home after closing.
$200 a day. Yeah.
And you're like, you know what? I'll give you the 30. Don't worry about paying me. Well, you know what? Now all of a sudden your offer looks that much more attractive and is shooting up to the top of the pile.
For sure. And for no extra money.
Exactly. And I've stated in other videos before, I've had offers accepted at listing price, but the occupancy is what won it.
Yeah.
So it's very important that when we do our homework, that we're really trying to find out what they want and talking to the agent, what would the agent like to see in an offer?
Sure.
Yes, it is about the seller ultimately, but there are ways to handle how things are spelled out in an offer that the agent's going to prefer.
And if we're already starting off on the right foot, hey, what helps you if your selling agent and the listing agent are both on the same page and they're already working together, just imagine how the rest of the transaction is going to go, whether or not there are hiccups.
Exactly. So the next thing we're going to dabble in a little bit is the EMD, earnest money deposit. Is there a set rule of what you should put down for an EMD, or is it more of like what's customary because every market's different?
Well, it's not set, and ultimately it is up to you as the buyer, but here's what the EMD does. It is you putting forth some cash, whether that's 1% of the purchase price, 10% of the purchase price, whatever it is in between, right? But you're putting skin in the game here. So you're not just saying, "Oh, I'll offer and see what happens." You're saying, "No, no, no. If you accept my offer, here's this money is going in escrow up front, and I'm already putting skin in the game here to say because if you fail to perform within the contract, the seller gets that money
Yep, because if you think about it, let's say you don't perform, and now that seller has to put the house back
back
on the
on the
market.
market.
Um, you could put 1 to 3%. Obviously, the more aggressive you get, if you put 3% down.
50%. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, no, we're closing costs. Bye bye. But if you do the standard 1% versus somebody who does 3%, obviously that 3% looks better.
Because
Um,
you're risking more if you do not perform.
ex-
It's just me saying by putting that money out there, it's listen, I'm serious about this and I am not backing out.
exactly. Do I have a lot of buyers that have gotten deals accepted with 1%? Sure. But again, it's other pieces of puzzle
hmm
that we're going to look at to make sure that the offer is as competitive as possible.
And you bring up a really good point. It's pieces of a puzzle where it's not, some people think, oh, I'm just going to throw occupancy or I'm just going to throw money or I'm just going to, but it all has to come together. And that's really why it helps to hire a professional who has done that before and who, if they have questions, have other people around them who've done that before over multiple years.
Absolutely. I mean, because we might come to you and say, "Hey, here's what the seller is looking for. Here's what we are suggesting." And then you come back and say, "Well, what do you think?" Well, here's what has worked for me. Here has what's worked in the past. And in the seller's market, having that experience and knowing what those sellers are looking for is huge. Lydia touched on a huge topic there. And again, another video. But having that knowledge of, what's been happening in the market, instead of just, throwing darts at the wall.
Right? And see
Um,
what sticks.
what shouldn't you do when you do an EMD? You are like, okay, here's 1500. I'm going to put that down. You have an inspection period.
hmm
Let's say it's 7 days. It's day 8. And you don't want the house anymore. What
Well,
happens with that EMD?
well, you have 7 days, and then you have, and it's different on every purchase agreement. But let's just say you have the 7 day inspection period window, and then you have 3 days to respond and to send. But you have to put an addendum in your purchase agreement saying, "Hey, we have a dissatisfaction of our inspection," and then that can be renegotiated. But if you don't get back to them in that 3 days and it's day 4 after the inspection,
Hmm.
bye bye earnest money.
Yeah. So especially with new or first time home buyers, I should say, usually budget is not plentiful. I'll say
Right.
that. So when you do that money, it's like, well, am I going to lose out on that money? Well, no. If we stay within that inspection period and notify the sellers within that time, as Lydia stated, that it gets credited towards your closing costs.
hmm
So no, you are not out that money as long as you perform within the contract.
Which
And
brings us to another thing. These are legal documents. This isn't just willy nilly. I wrote this handwritten note saying I'm going to do this, or I shook on it and that's my word. These are legal documents that if you fail to perform, you can get sued. So we're trying to help you out by going through, and when we submit an offer, we're going to go through and explain to you. And it's super important that you perform within the contract.
yep, and we did touch on the amount for the EMD. Again, having a large EMD amount, let's say the top 3%, that doesn't benefit us. It is strictly to help
Yep,
you as the buyer.
with
And
your
again,
closing costs.
yep, it goes towards your closing costs. what if you did have a big budget? Let's say, I've got some money to spend. I just sold my house. I've got some equity. I have a little bit that I can work with, so I can be aggressive.
Mhm.
I know other videos we've talked about an appraisal guarantee. Normally, and again, I have explained that, but I will obviously again for this video. Um, your house is 200,000, appraises for 190, but you go to the seller and say, "Well, I'll give you up to a $10,000 appraisal guarantee." So it appraises for the 190, but you're telling Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I'm going to come to the table with that extra 10,000 to get to that 200.
Yep.
Can everyone do 10,000? No, I've had some people do 5,000, 2,000. I mean, usually 5,000 tends to be a good competitive number. Now, I've had somebody, we just closed last week, and they put $40,000 for an appraisal guarantee.
Wow.
So, but again, that's
But
not.
he just said closing. He won that one.
Yes. So, but I definitely want to stress, and I know Lydia feels the same way. We are not out to push or inflate your budget. We are just giving you scenarios of if you do have the budget, here's what you can do.
Well, and I will caution you as well. I mean, and again, everybody's needs are going to be different. So if you're coming to us as a buyer and you say, you know what, I'm getting a house, I have a fairly big budget, but I'm moving in, 3 to 5 years. Well, maybe don't throw quite as much at a house if you're not going to recover that in equity. So you want to kind of be thinking ahead too. And every buyer is going to be different. Some people, they're like, this is my forever home. Then by all means, if you have the budget and it's your forever home and that's the one that you love, go ham. But think about what your needs are and what could potentially be coming down the line.
Yep, you make a great point. I mean, I find my forever home, not to sound cold or morbid, but it's the home you're going to drag me out of when when the day comes. Then yeah, you might want to think about it. There's also, and this next topic kind of ties into as well if you have a lower budget. It's called an escalation clause. What's an escalation clause?
So basically, you'll offer whatever list price, maybe a little bit over, but in that when you say you offer, so let's say you have a house and the list price is 200,000, and you say, all right, I'm going to offer 200,000, but I'm going to put an escalation clause in. Whatever is coming in that is over that, whatever highest and best is, and this is great in a multiple offer situation, whatever highest and best is, we will offer X amount over. $5,000 over, or it can be as small as $1,500 over, or whatever. Whatever that number looks like, you're offering more than the highest offer by that amount up to a certain amount. So we're still protecting you. If somebody comes in if it's 200,000 and somebody comes in at 250 and you can't afford that, say you're at 230, we'll say, the buyer agrees to offer 200,000 with an escalation clause, but we'll go up to 220, $1,500 over, up to 220. Then that protects you. You're not paying more than you can afford,
right?
But it makes your offer really competitive, and the sellers like that.
Well, and so let's say you're the seller, and I'm the buyer. Oh, Dan, we just got an offer for 240,000. Prove it. It's written in our contract, in the escalation clause, that a bona fide offer has to be presented in order for that to kick in, for the escalation clause to kick in. So
they can't just pull a number out of their hat.
Exactly. So let's say you were able to go to 220, 230, and someone says, oh, I've got an offer 229. Okay, that is definitely within our range. Please send me the offer for review to make sure it is legitimate.
So the seller says, show me the money, and the buyer says, show me the offer.
Exactly. So that's another way we're protecting you. So, hiring Lydia, hiring myself, it's definitely worth your while because it does in the end save you money. And again, whether you've got a large budget or a small budget,
Doesn't matter.
we are not here to inflate that budget to get a higher commission.
Mm.
I think you pointed out earlier we were kind of going over what we were going to speak about, and you said, that that's not our mission. Our
Yeah.
mission is to get you into a home.
To the point that when you come to me with a budget, or to Dan with a budget, we're going to be sending you houses within that budget. And really, I don't even want to show buyers a house that's outside of their budget. So if you come to me and you say, Lydia, my cap is 200,000, I cannot go higher than that. Awesome. I am not showing you anything that's a 200,000 or above.
Yep. And again, in the last video, we talked about other factors that is 200 your absolute threshold, because if that's the case, you might want to look at something a little bit lower because of taxes, repairs that maybe you have to assume. And I believe you touched on that in part 1.
Yeah. And I mean, again, this is a whole nother video, but again, he mentioned taxes, property taxes. You're not going to pay the same amount your second year as what you paid the first year. So, because those property taxes will become uncapped, and we'll touch on that later. We'll talk about that in another episode, because that honestly deserves to be its own episode.
Yeah.
But it's really, really important that you consider all of those factors going into it. So, but again, if you're just looking on your own, you don't hire a professional, how are you going to know to do that?
Yep. And so that takes us to, we're touching on not having a higher budget. We just touched on escalation clause. We did touch on occupancy, on, you don't have a lot of money to throw, but you have time.
Yeah.
We can definitely do that.
And I always find that I have time and money. Usually it's an inverse relationship.
What about transfer tax? So for all of you potential buyers out there, do you know what a transfer tax is? I know what it is. Lydia knows what it is. So a transfer tax is, okay, I go to sell my house. I'm paying a tax to transfer the legal ownership of it to the new owner. I'm paying that. But Lydia comes in as the buyer and says, oh, well, no, that's okay. I'll take care of it. Now, depending on the price of the house, $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 for the transfer tax. Again, it just really depends on that price. Technically, you're putting more money in that seller's pocket.
And it's less that they have to pay up front. And if you already have that, and you can do that, again, that's just something small that can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. So it's a nice, and something I always, if we're putting that in an offer, I'm highlighting that in my email to the listing agent.
Yep.
So that they see exactly what's in that offer. Exactly. I want that. Oh, okay. Wait a minute. Because I want them to see what's in the offer. I don't want them to assume that they're going to read through the entire offer. So let's face it, they'll read through to some degree, but if they're getting 5, 6 or more offers, would you want to read through every single offer that are pages long?
All the legal stuff?
Yeah. So transfer tax is another quick way. Assuming repairs. I know we talked about C of O, the city.
Or even just a general inspection. I mean, again, we always recommend that you go ahead and get an inspection done, because even if the house looks perfect, it's best to just go ahead and my mentor says this all the time, and I totally agree. I would rather have you make a $100 or a $500 mistake than a $100,000 mistake.
Excellent. Yeah, that's actually perfect.
Yeah.
There's also, and again, a whole nother video, your financing, whether you're conventional, FHA, VA. If you're FHA and VA, when they come in and do the appraisal, there's going to be requirements of that house that they're going to say, oh, well, this needs to be repaired or this needs to be installed, railings, etc. GFI, that's a huge one.
It's huge with that FHA especially.
It's not huge in the sense of costs, but it's huge in the sense of I see it almost every time. So, telling the seller, I've got the city repairs, and again, doing our homework before you even put the offer in. If you're like, yep, I can do those, I've got an uncle that can help me, or I can do it myself, then, it's something we can tell the seller, hey, we've got the repairs. buyer to assume. You'll see that a lot.
Yep. And also, it's worth mentioning if you go into a house again and you're looking at it and you're like, this is impeccable. We're going to be like, we'll get the inspection. But if you're like, you know what, it really isn't going to matter. There it goes.
And I knew it. Bust.
Okay.
Right. Where were we?
Inspection. So you may walk in and you're like, this house is impeccable, and really, Lydia, Dan, it's not gonna matter. I want this house. Then what we can do, again, we're still gonna want you to get that inspection, because again, $500 versus $100,000 mistake, you know. But what you can do is you can just say, listen, you may say there's nothing in this inspection report that is going to deter me. I don't care. I can replace all of the plumbing if that's necessary. I want this house. Then we can put in there, like, listen, the inspection is for informational purposes only. So then the seller, they're like, oh, okay. So if something, you know, whether it's little or big, if something comes up, all right, the buyer still wants this house and they want it bad, and so let's maybe look at their offer a second time.
Yep. So again, is that something we recommend all the time?
Not necessarily.
It's a very unique situation.
And it's got to be in great condition for us to even.
Yes, and it's got to be insanely competitive.
You don't want to walk in and see cracks in the walls, and then you're looking at the electrical panel, and that looks a little outdated, and you're like, I want to waive the inspection contingency.
Yeah.
Hold on.
Yeah, I've had a home, and actually we just closed on it last week, where it was a fixer-upper. It needed work, but they knew that they wanted that. It was the location, the size of the property. That's what they wanted. And then, we went through, looked at everything we could, because the seller flat out said, I don't want any contingencies. Cash offer, no contingencies, meaning no inspection or appraisal. Take it or leave it. And they were comfortable with that. But again, I made sure I advised them, please go over as much as you can with this house, look at it, go underneath it. And if you're still wanting to move forward, fine.
And sometimes, if you're a real estate investor and you flip houses, forget it. Go ahead. You know what you're doing. We'll help you find the houses that you need in the location. And if you say, you know what, I got it, fine, hands off. Because that's your prerogative and that's your goal. But if this is something you're living in, it's a little different.
Yeah. So.
And you're not planning to fix it up.
We went through how to structure a deal, and honestly, with most of our videos, there's gonna be continuations of other videos to elaborate more, because we've just scratched the surface. We haven't even spoken about cash offer versus somebody who's financing. How do you compete against
types of financing?
Exactly. How to compete against that. Ways to finance VA. There's different ways to manipulate VA to make it advantageous to the seller, despite any of the old wives' tales that you might have heard out there. Again, I keep going, but we're going to save that for another video.
You wouldn't come back and watch.
Right, and we want you to come back. And so we're going to continue the buyer series for the next video. I think we're going to spend some time on this one. How do they get a hold of you?
Well, my number is 734-645-7448. Call me, shoot me a text. And my email is lydia@yourrealtorlydia.com.
I'm Dan. You can call me, text me, 313-282-6861. You can also email me at dansturgillcbp, 2 L's, cbp@gmail.com. Take care, guys. We'll take care of you.
Toodles.